You know, it's been really interesting to me, for example, to watch the response for this argument, for young Caucasian males to hip-hop. You know, there's an aggressiveness about hip-hop that's really attractive to young Caucasian males, and there's something absurd about the spectacle of the young Caucasian males taking on the persona of inner-city black gang members. You know, but I'm sympathetic to it because there's an aggressiveness to that art form that's a necessary corrective to the insistence that the highest moral virtue for a modern man is harmlessness, which is absurd. Women don't even like harmless men, they hate them. They like to claw them apart. You know, what women want are dangerous men who are civilized. And they want to help civilize them. Right? That's Beauty and the Beast. So, you know, I'll tell you a funny story, and only engineers could have come up with this, because they're the only ones that have the unparalleled blindness to social convention that would allow them to discover it. So, the Google engineers, I like engineers, by the way, because they're very straightforward. The Google engineers wrote a book a while back called A Billion Wicked Thoughts, which was a study of internet searches, billions of them, literally. And they were looking a lot at pornography use. And, well, there's lots known about male pornography use, partly, and it's easy to understand. I mean, males are, you know, pretty visually oriented, and what attracts them to pornography is fairly straightforward. For women, the story is more complex. They use pornography too, but it tends to be literary, because women tend to like words more than they like visual stimuli. And so the Google guys tried to track down the archetypal structure of, well, they didn't use those words, of female pornography use. And so that's the taming of the wild man, essentially, by the desirable and virginal woman. And if you think women don't want that, then you better bloody well come up with an explanation for 50 Shades of Grey. Right, which is the most rapid selling novel in human history, and emerged at exactly the same time that all of this noise about the absence of gender roles is being produced, you know, en masse. It's like perfect female fantasy. It's exactly archetypally correct. It's Beauty and the Beast. So what the Google guys showed was the structure of Beauty and the Beast, although they didn't use that as a referent, that the female pornographic fantasy was wild guy, you know, somewhat careless about the wants and desires of others, attractive to everyone, therefore high status, tamed by the magic of a single woman and brought into a relationship with her. You know, because we also know, and the data on this is very clear, what's the relationship between money and well-being? Once you have enough money to keep the bill collectors from your door, so once you have enough money to stave off misery, which is sort of lower middle class, something like that in our society, maybe a little lower than that, extra money does not help you. It does not improve your life. So why bother with it? Well, that's what the women in the law firms think. It's like most of them, by the time they're in their 30s, are married. Almost all of them are married to men who make as much money or more than they do, because that's what women go for, cross-culturally, 4 to 5 years older, equal or higher in the socioeconomic status. So imagine you had men who could confer benefit and who were incapable of inflicting cost, and men who could confer benefit but were capable of inflicting cost. I think you'd see winners on that side because of that free rider problem. And that ties into what we'll discuss in relationship to the dark triad, because there's some mystery about why women seem to be attracted to these so-called dark triad traits. And I would say that they're using them as insufficient markers for the ability to, or the acquisition of status. So, and narcissists capitalize on that, right? Because a narcissist looks confident. And lots of confident people are competent. But some confident people aren't competent, but they can fool you. Yes. And then I think the other explanation is that if you had to choose between a benefit conferrer who could punish free riders and one who couldn't, you should pick the former. And so, you see this sort of thing. I really like the Disney movie Beauty and the Beast. I think they got it right. And so there's Gaston in that movie, and he's a narcissist, but he has physical prowess. Like, he can't understand why he's not the guy, but he's narcissistic. And then there's the Beast, who's a beast, but he's tameable. And so he can be a benefit conferrer, and he has the capacity to inflict cost. So one of the things one of the big 5 personality traits that the dark triad is most associated with is agreeableness, low agreeableness. And I do think that research psychologists and psychologists in general have a kind of ethical bias in relationship to the agreeableness dimension, and of course women are higher in trait agreeableness than men.
Right.
Reliably, it's about half a standard deviation. It's one of the biggest sex differences, and it's associated with compassion and politeness in the work we've done anyways. And so that's empathy, at least to some degree. Now the question is, what is the ethical utility of lower agreeableness, right? Because you'd think, well, it would interfere possibly with sharing, right? Because if you're more compassionate, more empathic, you're going to feel the hunger of other people and you'd be more motivated to care for them, let's say. But it's also possible that low agreeableness has something to do with, well, perhaps hunting prowess. That might be part of it, but it also might be part of the solution to the free rider problem. And so women are in a conundrum with agreeableness, right? Because they need a mate who's agreeable enough so they can bond with them and that will care for their children and that cares in general. But they need someone who's disagreeable enough so that they're capable, let's say, of dealing with free riders. And part of what constrains agreeableness, let's say from a temperamental perspective, so if you're low in agreeableness, let's say, well, you're less empathic, you're more competitive, you're rougher, blunter, tougher, what would you say, at least with regards to the compassion you show to others. And so what helps modulate that? Well, some of that would be conscientiousness. And so in the dark triad types, you see low conscientiousness as well. Really low agreeable, high conscientious types are quite interesting because you can trust them because they'll do their duty, but they're very blunt and direct and harsh. And that can be helpful as well because they'll tell you unpleasant truths even if they hurt your feelings. So there's some utility in that. So you can imagine that agreeableness can be modified, let's say, by conscientiousness. So that takes the psychopathy edge off it, because low agreeableness and low conscientiousness, that's a rough combination.
Yes.
And so, because there's nothing constraining it. And so women are attracted to some degree to the lower agreeable types. And I think that accounts for the bad boy paradox that you described, at least in part. And maybe it takes further experience and wisdom on the part of judicious women to see where they can get the disagreeableness that's necessary, but it has to be hemmed in by something like, well, conscientiousness. Right? Because the open types are going to experiment. They're going to try lots of different things. And that daredevil, I don't care, might be not easily distinguished from the capacity to engage in creative problem-solving pursuits, and perhaps with courage as well. Sometimes people value themselves greatly, and so they have high mate desirability in your terminology, or maybe some little corruption of your terminology. And again, I think the dark triad guys mimic that. It's like, I'm so good I can afford to, distribute my sexual prowess wherever I see fit. And there's some of that happens as men rise in competence hierarchies as well.